In some presentations, you have to work pretty hard to get clear on what your main points are. We're going to explore a few different ways to do this and emphasize the topical style of organizing your main points. So let's go to the computer and drill down on this. Welcome back, friends. In this video, we're going to talk about how to organize the main points of a presentation. We'll talk about several approaches and we'll drill down a little deeper on the topical approach, which is often the most tricky for people. We're assuming here you have an introduction, body, and conclusion to your presentation, and we're only talking about how to arrange the main points of the presentation. We're not talking about how to fill the buckets in with detail like stories and example, just the ordering and selection of your main points. First, let's talk about chronological. This is an approach that you can use where time is your key variable. If you're teaching somebody how to do something, for example, you might talk about the 3 steps involved: first, second, third step. You often see this for how-to type presentations. If it's a before, during, and after presentation, that's also using time as the key variable. But here you might talk about your life before an issue or time, and then during, which would be maybe the focus, the transformational experience, or a certain period of your life that was the center, and then afterward. That's another way to use time. Spatial is another way to arrange main points. This is not the most common, but I may use it once in a while if I'm talking about my life. For example, if someone wants me to talk about different places I've lived in my journey, I might organize it in terms of living in the East, then I lived in the West, and last, the South, where we're using direction or space. Symptoms, causes, and treatments is another option, especially in the medical world. If you're doing a presentation that involves anything medical or healthcare related, frequently you hear physicians and other medical professionals talk with these 3 main points. If you're doing a persuasive presentation, it's very likely you'll be ordering them in a problem-solution-benefits main point order. I have a whole separate video on this. It's a pretty sophisticated and psychological approach to organizing main points. It's a little more intermediate or advanced, but it is a great approach if you want to convince people to your point of view or convince them to take some action. I have a whole separate video, like I mentioned. I'll put the link to that video in the description below. Now we get to the topical approach to organizing main points. This one often throws people off because there's no one right way to select the subtopics of your presentation. If you have a subject that's not chronological, that's not problem, solution, benefit, then how do you do it? Well, you have to think about the overall topic and then break it down into its subtopics. I think that's a more accurate way to describe this, subtopics. So the idea here is you have a whole, you have a subject you're speaking on, and you have a focus, a main point, a thesis. And then you have to figure out, well, what are the natural parts of that thesis, of that whole? And those become your main points. Your main points will depend upon the unique aspects of the subject itself. No 2 topics are alike, and so you'll have to figure that out as you go. There's a little more art to this than science. So for example, if you're talking about dinosaurs, one way to do it would be to talk about the land, sea, and air dinosaurs. If you're doing your research and you're reading about dinosaurs, that's one of the main ways that your authors and researchers will break this up. But it's not the only way. You might talk about small, medium, and large dinosaurs. And so you have to figure out what your main point is to the whole presentation and then figure out how to break that into its natural parts. You might be talking about meat, for example, in a different subject, a different presentation, and you might discuss beef, chicken, and fish as your main points. But as you're reading and as you're researching, your focus might change a little bit, and you're like, I'm not really talking about meat as much as I am about protein sources for your diet. So then you might back out and rearrange these and talk about meat, beans, and supplements. I've seen people do it this way because these are different approaches to different ways to get your protein in your diet. Maybe camping gear is a topic you're passionate about. It's a topic I love to talk about in a lot of my videos because it's one of my main things I do in the summertime. In the nice weather, I camp with my family. And if I were doing that, I would talk about maybe my tent, sleeping bag, and backpack. That's one of the ways to discuss the gear. These are the subtopics of camping gear that you commonly hear about when you're reading in magazines and researching it. So if you're in a professional situation, this is where it gets a little tricky because let's say you're doing an update at a meeting. Well, every audience is there's different people at every meeting you go to, and it depends on what level of executive or manager you're speaking to and who else is there, time of year, and what the overall focus and agenda is for the meeting. But you might, for example, if you're doing a normal update on your department, you might talk about the different projects, the budget, and the staffing. That's 3 ways, 3 topics to break up your update into. So the parts have to be from the same whole, and that's a real lesson to take away from this. If you have a subject, you've really got to figure out what the natural parts are. And because when you go off in the wrong direction, something's not going to seem right to listeners. It won't hang together and be logical if you change the pattern, you change the variable you're using to decide on your main points. For example, if I were talking about camping gear and I talked about tents and sleeping bags, then I threw in this weird extra point about saving money, that's going to be awkward. That's going to be odd. And it's breaking the pattern in the topical order here and changing subtopics in a way. That's going to stand out a little bit, and it's not going to have that natural logical flow. You might also be talking about dinosaurs, or come back to this example, small, medium, and then you throw in there, and also we'll talk about dinosaurs that fly. Well, that's again going to break your pattern. So you have to figure out what your whole is and then break that into its natural parts. And that's really the key aspect of the topical main points approach. You want to figure out how to break the whole into its parts. So I hope this video has been helpful, and I encourage you to use it in your next presentation. So God bless, and I will see you next time.